Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Dating After Divorce podcast. I have my friend, coach, colleague, Mariko Gordon here on Zoom to share about dating and money. A little about Mariko. She built a $2.5 billion money management firm from scratch, flying her freak flag high. We're gonna have to talk about that.
Yep.
It was called Dharma, I believe. And in 1995, when Mariko founded this, only a handful of women of color owned their own firms. And she had to noodle out how to run a business while daily duking it out with Mr. Market and raising a family. Today, Mariko mentors women who want to start a business, turn their side hustle into their living, better manage their finances, or work through a tricky patch in life or business. She's also a poet, hypnotist, life coach, hula dancer, and treasurer on the board of the Asian American Writers Workshop. Welcome, Mariko, to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Sade.
Yeah,
I realize, there's a lot of freaky things in there.
I know, this is very exciting. Okay, well, as much of it as you can put in as we talk about kind of like dating and money, just, share all the spicy stories. So introduce yourself to the audience. Like, just tell them a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do now.
All right. Well, I'm half Okinawan, third generation, half WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, going back a long way. Both cultures do not like to talk about their feelings. So I have a double whammy there. So I've had to learn a lot in the last 6 decades. I actually was born in New York City where my parents met, but grew up in the island of Guadeloupe in the French West Indies until the age of 10, where my parents had a rent-a-car franchise in the French islands, and then in Hawaii, where my mom was born and raised. So I have a very melting pot background. And I was a comparative literature major in college, but I ended up in finance, being a bottom-up stock picker, so picking a concentrated portfolio of small cap stocks, US small cap stocks. That was my specialty. So a lot of it was focused on the stories that the numbers are telling, but also handicapping what the market was anticipating or not, and what was likely to happen that was not showing up in the numbers yet, but was going to. So that's the part that I love most. And I closed my shop in 2019, and just in time for the pandemic, actually. And since then, what I've been doing is coaching and business consulting, helping people with their businesses, either starting them or and a lot of it is about like showing up as themselves in their business, because I was able to do that. I was able to do that as a woman on Wall Street, and I feel very lucky that I was able to do that. So and so a lot of it too is I describe myself as a sort of a wingman for people who are in a financial shitstorm. And I also teach women business owners a lot about how to develop financial confidence through developing financial intimacy with their businesses, with their financials, which are the love language of their business. So, helping, as I'm sure you do, helping promote better communication between you and your business, and being able to sort of make decisions without mind reading and making assumptions, and that sort of thing. So there's some real parallels there, but that's me in a nutshell.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, and I have been on your newsletter, on your list for, I don't know, probably most of this year. And the way you talk about that relationship with, not a relationship with money in the typical money mindset coach kind of way, but more the relationship with your business. You talk about the business numbers, getting intimate with the business numbers. Like there's this like dance between you and the numbers in your business. And I think that's, a really different way of looking at it. And I would love for you to talk about like how that plays out in sort of in relationships, particularly for women who they've done the shitstorm you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the listeners, that's behind them. And there's, of course, still some pain, some regret, generally some wish I could have, would have, should have.
Right.
Now they're dating, and like trying to hope for something better in the future. But you know how it is when you have that, like, all of those emotions, all of those memories that create that distance between us and our numbers, between us and
Right.
our money. What are some things that you've seen, observed with your clients that really keeps us from having that intimate relationship with the money that would make us feel free enough to like date again, get married again?
So many things. But I would say one thing is that there's a fractal, right? So whatever our stuff is psychologically, or just in terms of our wiring and just kind of what we've been brought up in, how we see the world, and it's so deeply grooved in our unconscious, our relationship to ourselves will be reflected in our relationship with money. Our relationship with our love interests will also be reflected in our relationship with money. It's interesting. I really believe that. I've done this exact same podcast actually with a friend of mine, a coach she's a weight loss coach. And a lot of the money patterns also show up in eating and food. It's very interesting. So I think you and I should talk about this, and so to see how, if you're an avoidant attachment type, how that might show up in your dating life, and how it also shows up in your money, because you're probably not really wanting to know exactly how much you spent last month, right?
Yeah. I don't.
I promise you will feel better if you know.
You're right. Every time I do like walk through, and so I think for me, like with money, I do tend to avoid money. I was having this conversation with my children this weekend about money and kind of like the summer, and they're getting new jobs. And I was like, listen, this is how things are in our family. This is what we do. So I'm just letting you know so that as you make money this summer, you do things a little bit differently. And I talked about how I think kind of what I had observed with them and had seen in my own journey with money was, okay, in my childhood, there was a lot of deprivation, even though there was you could say there was a lot of wealth, but the wealth was not for you. Like there's wealth, but not for you in particular. And that created a certain identity. And so as a young person, I would spend to prove that identity wrong, to prove that. So when I had money, I would spend it so that I could prove that money was for me.
Right. And that counted. That it wasn't just like if the money was for the institution of the family, say, instead of for you, for your benefit, that you could do it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like, so as a young person, let's say in my 20s, because as a child, it was like, well, your dad is making all this money, but you can't have any, right? When I made money, and I had a great identity as someone who made money. So I could make money. I worked hard. I made money. When I had it, I would spend it to prove that it was for me. And then the energy of having money, letting money sit, letting money be my friend was not there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the conversation I had with my kids. I said, listen, like if you're going down our genealogy, this is the problem. So look out for that.
Right.
When you're tempted to spend all of your money, it could be because this is what's being passed down in the family. So definitely that avoidance of and of course that cycle would lead to like, okay, now there's not enough money, or I spent too much money and I don't want to look at
that money.
Right.
Then there's a shame. The
shame. And then there's like, now I don't have any, which goes back to that old identity of like, oh yeah, see, you don't have any because it's not.
Right. Because the money gets created, but it doesn't flow to you. So you're reinforcing that by like making sure it's like a hot potato for you. Let's get rid of the money because what I've been taught is that the money comes, but none of it can actually stick to me. Like I can't be Velcro. I can't be money Velcro.
Yes.
There's something wrong with me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so after my divorce, I worked through a lot of the, hey, okay, listen, money is for you. Money can stay. You can have that relationship with money. It can sit and you can just open your apps and look at it and be like, well, look at that, and enjoy that. And I think for a lot of the listeners, especially after divorce, some of that is lingering in different ways. I've worked with women who had to pay off hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt that their ex-husbands created. I've worked with women who had to, give half of being the major breadwinner to a philandering lazy philandering ex-husband having
Yeah.
to give half of their 401k by law,
Yeah, that's
and
tough.
hundreds of thousands of dollars to that ex because by law that, and so then there's stories that we all have based on
Right.
whatever has happened, like the story that I had. The listeners all have a story.
Mm-hmm.
How can we start to like look at that story and resolve it so that it's not the story we're using to make decisions about a new relationship?
Right. Yeah. The first place that I always start anybody in terms of whether I'm working with them personally to help figure out their financial flow, the plumbing of how their money should flow so that they don't, so it doesn't all go down the sewer. Or a business owner is I always start with the money genealogy. And so I have a questionnaire, which I'm happy to share with you actually. So if you wanted to put it in the show notes, where it just sort of, you really are going ancestor by ancestor, a little bit about your own story, but also ancestor by ancestor in terms of what their financial situation was like, what their financial mindset was like, what kinds of things did they teach you. And it's really interesting because when you lay it out that way, and I even just have a graphic where you can, like a family tree, but you can see the money family tree, and you can see these patterns being repeated, money being used as control, money being used in an abusive way, money being like a conflict between the saver and the spender. And the more money there was, the greater the conflict, right? So just stopping to lay it to see where you're coming from is useful. And then the next thing is to go, how did you handle money in the past in your relationship? So hyper capable women who are very driven and entrepreneurial, often I think I have this theory, I would love to sort of see a study done about this, and I put myself firmly in this camp, right, is that we have what I call the little red hen syndrome. We want to do everything, we take care of everybody, we come last, and we are like great enablers and very codependent, and especially if you're like hyper independent, because this is so I cop to all of this, by the way, right? So this is like my thing, and it's like, where did that come from, and why did I go, I will never be dependent on a man, right? So what did I do? I created financial dependency in the men. Right? Because I didn't know that there is a healthy balance between where you have a healthy interdependence, right?
Wow.
So part of it is how was money handled in my marriage, and was I okay with that? Where were the resentments, right? Where were where was the contempt? Where were the resentments? Where did all and just you have to be kind of willing to really look at that, which is hard because you have to feel very safe to do that.
Yeah.
And then you have to see if you can, then you have to do the work to kind of integrate that and go, oh, all right, I want to be financially independent, but I also want to have an interdependence. So I don't have somebody dependent on me, and we're a team.
Right.
How do we do money as a team? Right. And how do we do money as a team fairly? Because if I earn 5 times as much as my partner, right, is it fair to ask them to pay for half the expenses? Probably not. But you're probably not going to feel good if you pay for everything.
Right.
Right. So and then I think with second relationships, either with kids or post kids or whatever, then you have, how do you handle the estate planning gets complicated, right? How do you handle that? It requires, so it requires a lot of thought because you want to take care of your partner, and you also don't want to mess up your kids.
Yeah.
And you really need, this is where you have to pay for good legal advice to make sure that you don't create a situation that's really messed up for your partner should you die first, or really messed up for your kids. And both are very easy to do if things are not thought through.
Right. Yeah. What are some mistakes that, people make going into that second relationship, or things that they don't think about when they're dating or when they're about to make a commitment or getting remarried. Like what are some of the things that people make, whether they do it on their own before they choose a partner, or with their partner while planning that commitment?
So I think there's a bunch of different, so I'll free associate, right? One is it's human nature to fight the last war, right? So the same way that the French, built the Maginot Line, it was going to be hold the Germans back. They wouldn't be able to ever cross this. And of course, the Germans said, yeah, we're not going to try that. We're just going to go through the woods, right? So that's always like, we're always like, whatever was messed up about money or messed up in our prior relationship, we're going to be hypersensitive to, right? And we're going to be like looking, I don't want that. So if my partner was financially illiterate or was a spendthrift, I'm not going to do that, right? But then you might end up with somebody who's like miserly, right?
Mhm.
Because you're
Yep.
fighting the last war. You're so anti-spendthrift that you go with somebody who's has a scarcity mindset, is very not generous.
Yes.
So, and there's a certain kind of back and forth of generosity that I think most people want in life, right? It doesn't have to be transactional at all. But so one thing is to not fight the last war. The second thing I would say is to also clean up your energetics and your finances. So there are people who their relationships are over, their marriages are over, they're separated. It can range anywhere from it's amicable to, gee, both parties are so avoidant, they just don't even communicate about that, to one party wants to resolve the financial piece, but the other party just, it's not that they want to get in the way, they just kind of cannot, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like unfinished business sometimes. And sometimes there's a divorce, like in North Carolina where I live now, if you separate for 12 months, you're divorced, but your financial settlement, your divorce is not contingent on that. You still have to work out the money. If you don't do that, it could take years, right? So I think one thing is just get really clean financially. Like just really button that up so that energetically you're clean.
Right.
That's a thing. The other thing is to what will happen, particularly for women, I think, who are a couple of things. So if you are a non-earning spouse because you're taking care of children or the house, that your earning partner should be can, if you can afford it, money in a spousal IRA. So at least you're also having retirement money that's compounding tax deferred. You should also, I think, have a real awareness, because I think it's easy for the earning partner to discount the economic value that somebody who's not making money but is avoiding expenses, nannies, housekeeping, right? Personal, right? That there's some acknowledgement of that, even to the point of transferring assets, maybe, or something. Like I really feel like that's an important conversation to have. Back to the we're in this together. Other mistakes I see are if you weren't the one taking care of money in your family and you're female, and most women are going to outlive their partners, you don't need to know everything about investing, but you do need to know there's some very basic things that you need to know, and you also need to cultivate discernment around the people, your service providers, the people you rely on to. And that's just, you got to do that out of self-respect, both self-preservation, but also self-respect. So I think that's also important, that if you don't have that, once the pain is out, once you're kind of back on your feet again, to really actively say, I'm going to invest in myself to learn how to learn what I don't know. And there's so much available that it's, but you kind of owe it to yourself to do that. I think that's probably enough for now.
I think there's a part of that last piece of doing it out of self-respect that's important, to almost like that last piece of growing up. I always, I have my theory, I don't think there's a study on this, is this, because of the cultural narrative around marriage and how marriage is set up as like this destination,
Right.
state of being where you are sort of frozen in time, a lot of people do freeze in their maturity during a marriage. At least that was my personal experience. It's been the experience of a lot of my clients, where it's almost like, because the marriage is like this destination, there's this sense of being done.
Yes.
Right now that you're partnered. And then the next destination is, okay, let's have kids and let's grow the kids and then send them out into the world. That's the next destination. And I've noticed that, especially for women, there's a lot of adulting and adulting concepts that get left out.
Yeah.
The growing your understanding about money, growing your understanding about investing and wealth, because the narrative is men are better and men do that and men are the providers. That part of maturity gets sort of like put aside. And there are other areas. Sexuality is another one.
Yep.
Exploring what you like and is another place that gets frozen into whatever that partnership is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's no additional, often not much additional growth in certain areas. And so when women have come to me to work with me after their divorce, what I've noticed is, there's a little bit of growing up to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, money is one of those areas where there's a little bit of growing up to do, where especially if you were a stay-at-home mom, or your ex was the breadwinner, or he handled all the money, there can be that sense of like anxiety and inadequacy around money that women have, especially because then society is also telling you you're bad with money.
Right. Yeah. No, I had this recently with someone. I was talking to this guy, middle-aged guy who does, sort of not quite day trading, but sort of day trading, and telling me about, like, because I was asking about the composition of the forums and all of this, these systems that they follow, and what the gender divide and the demographics were, right? Because I wanted to see who and it was very skewed, very heavily male, and he said something, well, about like women being too emotional to be investors, and I like fucking destroyed him.
Oh my
because
goodness.
forgive the F-bomb, but I was like so beside myself, because I was like, actually, so I had to pull the well, actually card, which I know is serious, but all the research shows that women actually make better investors.
Yeah.
Because they tend to do their homework and they tend to be patient. And so they don't feel compelled to take action, and they're actually far less emotional. So it's interesting because I think, in a way, being allowed to societally, right, being allowed to sort of feel the feels without judgment allows them to let the feelings flow. And I think for the guys, maybe you're like feeling uncomfortable because, it's an ego injury as well too. Like, I'm downside, I got to do something, and we're so used to all the ego injuries of not being respected. We're like, we're used to this. It's like the stock is down. Oh, wait, this is something where I'm holding this for the long term, and we let it go. But I mean, study after study after study, right? And he's like spouting this, and I mean, I had to let it rip. But sorry. But yes, on the adulting, because I think also the American model, or maybe it's the more Western model of this sort of binary star system, and where there isn't room for growth.
Yes.
In both people, and then they end up feeling trapped. And in midlife, when you start going, wait, right, what do I want to do before I die? It can feel very constraining for both parties, and I think also just our societal kind of capitalistic, very work ethic can also just be very stressful. But I think you're right in that. I think there are more women brought up to be, the man will take care of you. So you can see this in your genealogy, right? The man will take care of you. Or there isn't quite that pressure. And I know, and I know that you have clients too as business owners, and we have a lot of people depending on, a lot of mouths to feed. That responsibility of being the provider is big and stressful. And so I can see why men resent that, if they feel like they have to do all of this and without support, that they're not a team. And then I think for the women who choose to stay at home to be homemakers, it's very important that to me that worth be acknowledged, because it's very easy for guys to default to the, oh, I make all the money, I have all the power.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter because it's an absence, right? There's not a dollar hitting the bank account, but there's like 75 grand of expenses that you didn't have to do for your kids.
Yes.
You know, like
Yeah.
that counts too, you know. So
yeah,
you know, that's
because you have this family being created and cared for your enjoyment, really.
yeah. Yes, yeah, or your gene pool will survive, you know, they will be well educated, they will be. And I think also too is just as you know, the economics and the social structures are making it like the stakes get higher and higher, and it kind of feeds a scarcity mindset too, I think. So then, you know, there can be a lot of pressure for keeping up with the Joneses, not just financially, but also just in terms of opportunities in certain, you know, social strata.
Yeah. For women who are dating, like bringing up, I know this is one of the ones that I get a lot, is when should I ask? When is it okay to ask how much a person makes? When is it okay to ask what their credit score is and what their assets are? Like, and how should I ask it?
Right. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you're probably much better at the how, because I'm sort of a bit of a blunt instrument. But I would say, you know, look, when you're going from friends with benefits to a committed relationship, right? The commitment isn't just like, okay, well, we're, you know, going to be whatever the commitment is, because it doesn't have to be monogamous.
It could be as
but
simple as
there's a
moving in together, or
Yeah.
we are now exclusive, or we're getting engaged.
Right. Then I would say definitely before any public commitment, I'd say at the point where you're wanting to make a commitment, then that's when the time for the, all right, let's talk about this, you know, because presumably you've met the family, right? So you know what you're in for in terms of the in-laws, right? Yeah. You get a sense of like what, right? And I think that's when you're like, okay, you know, this is what I have. This is, you know, and if there isn't that transparency, then you have a situation where, and it doesn't, and I'm not going to blame the guys exclusively, because I see women do this too, where they can be very secretive, particularly if they're afraid that their independence is going to be compromised, or if they're afraid that they're loved for their assets and not for themselves. Yeah. So it's you know, it's a mutual kind of coming clean. And I think it's important, because I think there are women who really cherish their independence, and rightfully so, because financially it's very easy to get screwed, especially if you give up your earnings power for a couple of decades. But I feel like, oh, I just lost my train of thought, Sade. I'm sorry.
We were just talking about when to have the conversation.
Oh, yes. Okay. So
and then the transparency, how important, I think you mentioned how important the transparency.
Yeah. So because I think if you're not willing to be transparent, that is a really big red flag in my book. Right? And I think that, because you need to work out whatever you need to work out, because you don't want to have somebody marry you and then find out that you have a lot of debt, or you don't want somebody to marry you and go, oh, you're sitting on, you know, you're going to inherit $50 million, I'm going to stop working, right? So you have to sort of, I think what's important is you have to have the money conversation around how you want to do money together first.
Yeah.
So you get a sense of like how they think, you know, what was their family genealogy like? How did they handle it with their prior relationships, right? Because some men want to pay for everything, and they feel that entitles them to everything. And if that's the case, like, you know, that's what you're agreeing to, right? And others will be insulted if you say, well, no, it's my turn now, or let's go Dutch, right? Money and power go hand in hand. So this is something to think about. But I would have the conversation around your philosophy, around your history with money, your philosophy with money, how you want to do it together as a team first. And then once you work that out, like, oh, really? You want to, even if I can earn more than you, like you would have a problem with that. Like a lot of men do. Like I was shocked to find this out, right?
That is true. Yeah.
You know, and you're like, really? Like if we're a unit, doesn't it matter like what the unit makes together, right?
Yeah.
So you want to work all of that out. And then you can have all right, let's sit down, let's do this. It might be helpful to do it with a third party, like a financial planner, because then there's a kind of, it's kind of like a marriage there, right? There's a third person in the room who will be objective about this, but preferably one without, who's not judging and shaming. And because once you figured out your philosophy, you can come and say, look, this is how we want to run our money together. Help us figure out how to put these pieces together in a way. Hey, I want to make sure that I have enough for my kids. But on the other hand, this is a classic situation, right? Your spouse gets to live in your house forever, right? But if your spouse doesn't have the means to maintain the house, if your spouse has to go into a nursing home or a memory care unit, right? What happens? Will the kids want to sell the house? Maybe those proceeds would be useful, right? Just all sorts of scenarios that you really need to think through. So you really need help to do that. But I would say have the conversation first about how you think about things, and then have the conversation on what the things are. And then get help implementing the what you things, how to do the how with the what, right? But you got to work out all the how. That's the hard part too.
Right. Yeah. How important do you think it is for people to earn within the same range, especially like the second half of life? In your 40s and 50s, you meet someone new.
Yeah.
Does it even make sense to date someone who's like, where there's like a huge gap between your earnings or your assets, or like, does that just create more work? That's not.
I think the question would be, why more? And here's what I mean. If, because I don't think that the gap really matters. So say you have somebody, okay, so let's say you have somebody, say you're worth a lot more, 10 times more than the person you're dating. Right. But it may be that the person you're dating, chose a profession like being a teacher, and you were a Wall Street investment banker, right? That person is their net worth, right? They didn't have the same opportunity set to create a lot of wealth, right? And because our society doesn't value teachers enough, because the stress levels are probably the same as investment banking, but right. But they're not a deadbeat. You know what I mean? They're in there. They're like a real human, so then that's a different, like, that's not a problem. Maybe they've taken care of the resources really well, and they have a really good teacher's pension, and they're been wise with their money. Right. So I would say that gap doesn't matter, because there isn't the sort of dysfunction, right? And as long as I think that's
an absence of dysfunction in the difference,
in the disparity. Yeah, I think that's really key. That's the much more important thing. And then the other thing too, where you have sometimes when you have, the sort of, the super rich men with the very good looking, much younger women, because they're never like, the same age, or like really accomplished, but not, whatever. And so it's cliche, but the cliches exist for a reason, I would say. So for them, they're going to be very, hey, this is the deal, right? And they'll also probably be much more transactional around, like, this is what you get if this doesn't work. I mean, look at Rupert Murdoch. I mean, look at how many wives he's had, and and all those kind of succession problems. But for most of us, we're not in that realm. But I would say if you are,
right.
I'd say dysfunction.
If a person, in some ways, if there is dysfunction, telling yourself the truth about it.
Yes.
Like if you are dating Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah, right.
your version of that.
Right.
And it is transactional,
Right.
not telling yourself it should be different.
Yes, yes, yes. Because it could just be, you know what? I'm your arm candy. I will, I'm gonna sleep with you, and everybody's gonna be so jealous that you get to sleep with the hot, like, model who's 30 years younger than you. But you're an old guy, right? Let us not kid ourselves. I am sleeping with you because you're loaded and I like flying helicopters.
And I think that's one of the things that I like. I always tell my clients, I'm like, when you look at this, what I try to help them do is see.
Yes.
When you are dating a person, I will help you see what you are seeing,
Right.
and know what you know, and then decide.
Right. Yes.
You can
Yes.
choose it or not choose it, but don't.
Right.
What is it? Being blindsided is not going to be a side effect of working with me to choose a new partner.
Right. Yeah. I think, so this is because I work on this a lot with money too, because I have this framework, which is like, before you can get in touch with your true desires, because a lot of us are conditioned never to really even know how to do that, right? Because that's always been so denied. But so, to know what we really want and to know what's really going on around us, right? We need to feel safe enough to be able to see. We need to be accepting of the fact that whatever reality is or whatever we want might create problems for us, that then we have to be willing to take action on. Right. So it's kind of like you have to feel safe in order to see, and then in order to act. And I think that discernment piece is so critical to cultivate. And it's so easy to be gaslit. It's so easy not to listen to your intuition, to your instincts. It's so Gavin de Becker wrote this book called Fear. It's like this giant,
The Gift of Fear.
The Gift of Fear. Isn't that an amazing book?
All the time. Like, my clients are like, listen, you need to read this.
Yeah. And so a lot of that kind of conditioning that we grow up in the soup of that kind of conditioning, and that conditioning that allows us not to feel afraid when we should, can also affect our discernment too. So yeah, I'm a big believer in being willing to see. And sometimes, it's too painful to see what's actually going on, right? And so if you have a philandering partner, right, we all know this is a very common story, right? All of a sudden, all those things, all those little clues, right? All of a sudden, boom, like they fall into focus, and all of that stuff that we had little clue by little clue been justifying as not a thing. All of a sudden, when you know the truth, you see everything, right? And then there can be a lot of shame around not having seen it before, etc. But this is human nature. Like, we will not let ourselves see things that are more than our capacity to handle. And as children, like, there's so much, like, if our caretakers are not taking care of us properly, for us to see that is too upsetting to our sense of survival. So we have to justify it, or we have to say, or we have to make it about us that we're wrong, or we're faulty, right? But so that's the biggest thing, I think, is there an interpretation about this that would be too painful for me to acknowledge? Particularly because, and I think there's always we always feel it somatically.
Yes.
Right. I think it's rare that somebody's completely, like, sort of tone deaf somatically. Right. And the signal may not be very strong.
Yeah.
It's usually a little twitch. And it's just like, whenever there's that twitch, to just stop and just objectively kind of go, wait, what just happened? I said, pass the salt. He said, this. He said, wow, you always pass the salt, like, so aggressively. Right. And you're like, well, what? Right. I mean, but it's just like, when there's that twitch, you have to pay attention. And when there's that twitch, or especially when money is used to
Yeah.
control, manipulate, and in a power abusive kind of a way, the same way that a lot of us who end up in relationships that aren't healthy,
Mm-hmm.
and we wake up years later and go, wait, what, how,
Yeah.
right? But it's a very gradual process where we lose our ability to hear that little voice, we lose self-confidence, right? It's the classic, like, and people are like, what? You know, like, and when people are in really abusive, like truly abusive, capital A abusive situations, they're like, why couldn't you? It's like so complicated. It's just not that easy. And that, so back to that same fractal, the same reason that like the person who's being like hit, you know, by her violent, abusive husband and doesn't leave,
Yeah.
and everyone's like, how could you not, right? That same fractal operates on the, hey, why are you passing the salt so aggressively to me?
Yeah.
Because I was just about to ask you, I was asking you about where you were last night, and now you're making it about the salt being passed aggressively because you're redirecting,
Yeah.
right? So some
Yeah.
part of you goes, wait, what? Unconsciously goes, the twitch goes, wait, something happened. The other
Yeah.
part of you gets like emotionally, well, what do you mean? Like, I pass the salt aggressively, right?
Took the bait. I call it
Yeah,
taking
and
the bait.
exactly. And then, you know, so that was a successful deflection,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So you know, it's that, I think. It's like we cannot, I mean, I have so much, because I had this as a kid, you know, like it took me much later in life to sort of see how I couldn't let myself see certain things. I had an alcoholic, you know, very sort of angry drunk dad who, when sober, was great, and you know, when it was like a completely different person, right? So I'm your classic textbook, you know, adult child of an alcoholic.
Yeah.
But when you I couldn't let myself see what that really meant.
Yeah.
Or my mother, you know, kind of not interfere, you know, there's, you know, that very Asian, like we just are silent and stoically bear it, you know.
Yeah.
You know, you're not asking the kid, hey, how was that for you? You know, or wow, that was, you know, whatever, right? You know, or oh yeah, I let you be in a car when your dad was drunk and driving,
Mm.
right? So stuff like that, like we can't let ourselves sort of see that, because these are the
Right.
people who are making sure we live, you know,
Right.
and they're human and they're messed up too and whatever, but
Yeah.
like, so we develop the capacity to be to willingly blind ourselves to
Yes.
things.
Yes.
That's
Oh,
my long way of saying that.
oh, 100%. No, 100. And that, I mean, like in my practice, my clients, I'm always like, okay, because sometimes as they date,
Mhm.
that shows up.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, why did you go on date number 3 with this guy? Right. And so as we work together, usually within the first couple of months, we can identify what I call their kryptonite. Okay,
Uh-huh.
this is your kryptonite. When you see a guy who looks like this,
Correct.
turn all of your blinders on. You
Yeah.
turn them on because he looks like this.
Yeah.
For another client, it's the art. Like, I want this person who is creative and artistic. And whenever she meets a person who is like that, she turns all of her blinders on because
Right. Yeah.
we want to make this work. And I think many women in this sort of this sphere who've experienced divorce or challenges
Yeah.
with dating, we have that
Yeah.
ability. Many of us from childhood, I had mine from childhood. And it's just a switch. We just switch it in because we're hoping and we're wanting. And I think a lot of this work is being willing, like you said, to feel that discomfort of saying, okay, I really do want my blinders off.
Right.
And I'm going to see things in ways that make me uncomfortable,
Yes.
but
Yes.
better to see than
Yes.
to repeat the cycle.
Absolutely. The truth will always set you free.
Yes.
It may horrify you, and you may feel all sorts of, you know, it's all sorts of really, really uncomfortable feelings. And you might feel a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, and, you know, like the truth of like your shitty behavior, you know,
Yeah.
and what you contributed to this, whatever the meaning you made of stuff. But man, there is never a substitute for actually knowing what's really going on.
Yeah.
both internally and externally. And no amount of magical thinking that's not real happiness. You know what I mean? And
Oh,
I define happiness as a kind of contentment and groundedness, right?
yeah.
We
100.
want the pedestal, we want the blinders on, because it's if we have the blinders on, it's like a higher high.
In the moment, we feel great. It's like we
Yeah.
already had a whole bunch of cocaine.
Right.
I don't know how that feels. I
Right.
get that, but how I
Right,
imagine.
but it's that euphoric, right? That's like what we imagine, that sort of manic kind of like, you just feel like top of the world, ma, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And man, that's like, to me, like I've learned that the pedestal thing that is like red flag,
Yes.
when I want to put someone on a pedestal, back off. you
Yeah,
know?
when the person has no flaws and everything is amazing and everything's great. Yeah, when my
When you-
clients come and I'm like, there's nothing to coach on. You're not having any, he doesn't annoy
Yeah.
you in any way. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Like when you can't see somebody's three-dimensional humanity, that
Yeah.
means you're not seeing it's a Potemkin village, right? It's just a facade. There's no, you really, that's the thing. Yeah, I really say it, because you want to love somebody for who they are, the same way that you want to be seen and loved for all your for all the things that make you uniquely you, 90% of which are probably annoying to other people, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Money, like you said, I mean, bringing it back to money, being willing to see how this partner is with money, being willing to see how they truly feel about you making money, because sometimes you can mistake the person's desire to be supported by you for them being your cheerleader. You can mistake them being willing to pay for things, as being like generosity, when, like you said, it could be control. Like it really depends on the individual. The external action is not what you don't interpret the external action. He paid for dinner. He always pays for dinner. Doesn't mean anything until you put it in the context of that individual.
Exactly. Yeah, I would say, and I mean, I think that yeah, it's both, right? I would, because I mean, actions do speak, but I think to your point, it's what's so in a commercial
the energy behind the action.
behind it, yeah, because in a commercial transaction, right, you always want to follow the money. So I often tell my clients, you got to follow the money. Like, you're the client, you're paying for this, right? The service provider should be delivering the service that you have hired. And I think for a lot of women, oftentimes, I mean, like, I'm like, no, you need your books done not 3 months late, right? I mean, there's just like we feel like almost, like, even though we're paying, like we still feel like grateful that they're doing the work, but they're being compensated for it fairly, right? So there's a kind of like, we need to separate out sometimes a transactional thing from we're uncomfortable with the sort of some of the power dynamics that go with transactional commercial transactions too. But I feel that in personal transactions too, right? It's like, what happens when you say, oh no, honey, dinner's on me tonight, or let's split the check from now on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And or if it's sort of like, because if he's always paying, when is he going to feel resentful?
Right. Yeah. What is he expecting?
Right.
From the fact that he always pays.
Right.
And don't tell yourself nothing.
Please. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know, in my youth, when I got married very young at 24, but there was a brief window when I dated, and I was so uncomfortable when men took me out to dinner. I just, now this is part of my stuff, why the hyper, like the hyper independence is like equals, like, I need to be in control and I don't want to owe anybody anything. Part of that's a Japanese thing, that like, if you owe somebody something, it's like, you can't just, right? So there's a multiple layers of stuff, but I was always so uncomfortable by that. you know, and then if you had a guy, and as a feminist too, you know, something I was kind of born that way, because I couldn't figure out like why being female should like get in the way of opportunity. Hello, naive me.
Yeah.
But you know, I was like, why would you have a problem sharing the tab? Like,
Yeah.
well, what's so offensive about that? Because
Yeah.
if it's offensive, that says something. Then you paying actually means something.
Exactly, 100%. Does it mean something? And what does it mean? And getting that frame of reference together. A lot of my clients, you know, meet men, and from the very first conversation, it's like, oh, you are, I mean, some of them will say, oh, you're intimidating, or you make so much money, or you have it all together, you're high maintenance. There's just all of that subtle. And I'm always like, well, if that's, I mean, if this is date number one, honey, do we really want to find out what's down the line? Like,
Right, I know, like,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And then, and to your point, women are then conditioned to give the benefit of the doubt.
Oh gosh.
So the
yes.
man being intimidating was somehow their fault.
Yes.
And now they should adjust. They should go for date number 2 and date number 3, but they should adjust so that he feels more comfortable.
Yes,
And I'm
yes,
like,
yes,
no,
yes.
honey.
Yes.
No.
You want somebody who's comfortable from the get-go,
From the
where
get-go.
you're not dimming your light in order for their comfort. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting. But I really think that getting the money thing clear is a good, because it's so uncomfortable. Like, you know, like people are more willing to talk about sex or what they want sexually. I think even the women still have trouble with that. Than I think with money still.
It's, 100%. Girlfriends are way more eager to
dish
share
on
with
that
each
stuff.
other what's going on sexually than, you know, how much they made in their bonus.
Like,
we're conditioned to think how it makes other people feel and things like that. But yeah, these are conversations that, you know, I bring up with my clients. I'm like, okay, let's talk about money.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning. What are you thinking about how your person earns? What are you thinking? What kind of, because I have them create their relationship vision first. Now, of course, it's a living, but it lets them get all their thoughts out on paper.
Right.
Examine them and then massage them and then sort of compare each person to that vision and see, okay, he meets it, he doesn't meet it, or the vision, I want to change the vision based on this person. Really working and exploring through all of these things as they go. And money is a huge part of it. And like in my practice, we try to keep it something that we're talking about the whole way throughout.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It really is, because it is a tell, because I think, you know, sex and money are both super loaded. So
yes, absolutely.
You know, that's where all the I don't know if it's, you know, using the word dysfunction is right, but that's where all the weirdness is going to show itself most clearly. Yeah, absolutely.
Mariko, thank you so much for sharing. This has been such an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. If the listeners want to connect with you to talk about money, to talk about business or poetry, just kind of give us a little summary of, you know, who you work with, what you do, and also where they can find you if they want to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had so much fun. Actually, I can't believe the time went by so fast. I'm like, wow. So the advantage of having an unusual name, Mariko Gordon, is that it's very easy to find me. So I'm on Facebook, and I'm going to be, I'm sort of more sporadic on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, but I do plan on being more diligent. And I do have an email list where I talk about money. So sometimes it's just purely practical, tactical. Sometimes it's both mindset and tactical. And then I have always, you know, some links that are useful either to feel safety in order to be able to be willing to have discernment, tools that help with discernment, and then what aligned action might look like. And then it's just an endless circle that we go through, because then there's an outcome from our action that we have to like accept and process, and then we have to learn from that and go forward. So that's the easiest place to find me. And I do, I do also offer classes for people to develop financial intimacy with their business, so that they can, have hot dates, really deep, productive relationships, mutually growing, beneficial relationships with their business. And also, I'm probably going to be teaching more about investing as well too, because this comment by that guy just got me so pissed off.
Yes, let's do it. Thank you so much for being on here today. Listeners, all of Mariko's links will be linked up in the show notes, or just do a search for Mariko Gordon, Mariko Gordon, and you're likely to find one of her, either her website or her social media. But definitely, I'm a fan of the email list. So if I'm going to recommend one place to go, it's going to be the email list. Thank you all for your time and attention today. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Mariko, thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Sade. It was my pleasure.